Welcome everyone. So I'm Lauren, Head of People Experience at Learnably. I'll tell you a little about me and the panel, and then we're just going to dive straight in. So for me, I began my people career at ASOS.com. I joined at one of probably the most exciting moments as they were building out their tech team for the first time. They grew from a team of maybe about 200 to 500 plus, seeing through a period of hypergrowth and establishing a platform model for the first time. So I can't be more excited to be hosting this panel today. I've since been at Booking.com. I did a tiny little dip into banking, a place called iTech Media, and earlier this year I took on leading people experience at Learnably for the first time, where I'm evangelizing the concept of people experience as a product. If you haven't heard of Learnably, it's a workplace learning platform that puts learners in the driving seat for their own development. So if you think of any online marketplace in your head, like ASOS, like Booking.com, we're essentially building that for learning, where learners can use personal learning budgets to explore our marketplace and choose learning that's suited to their preferences, whether it's a course, a subscription, a book. We're all about empowering individuals to make the right choices for their own growth. So enough about me. Today we're going to be looking at developing ICs into leaders, and I'll tell you a little bit about our wonderful panel. So first of all, we have Glyn, who is the CTO of Digital Solutions at iTech and has over 16 years of expertise in delivering software projects and leading tech teams in the UK, US and Europe. He considers himself a technical all-rounder with experience in multiple tech stacks, cloud solutioning, distributed team performance, tech advising, and also interim CTO consulting. Josh has started multiple businesses, helping scale them to 150 plus people and $100 million in revenue. Today, he is the CEO at Mindstone, focusing on building a platform that helps people learn faster, remember more, and get things done. Previously, he was co-founder and chief product officer at Super Awesome. It's the biggest kids technology company in the world, and it was acquired by Epic Games in the summer of 2020. Next, we have Laura Baldwin, who is the president of O'Reilly Media, the premier source of insight-driven learning on technology and business. Laura started with O'Reilly in October 2001 as CFO. She added COO to her responsibilities in 2004 and became O'Reilly's first president in March 2011, taking on responsibility for the company's worldwide businesses. Laura is a super avid reader and a passionate advocate for lifelong learning, which makes her brilliant for this panel. And last but certainly not least, we have Katherine, who leads the tech team at FutureLearn, which is an online learning platform running free short courses through to online degrees. In her previous role at CTO at CV Library, she grew the tech team from 5 to over 50 people. She believes in developing people to reach their full potential and thrives on helping them find pragmatic, creative, and solutions to technical challenges. So we've got an incredible group that is going to take us through our topic of developing ICs into leaders. So we're going to get stuck right in, and we're going to start with the concept itself. Should everyone aspire to make the switch from IC to leader? Who in our panel's got some thoughts on that? Maybe Glyn. What do you think?
Hi, Lauren. Great to be here and great introduction for us all. So thank you for that. So with every developer, everybody especially in the tech industry, they always want to progress in their career. They want to see a path forward and growth and being able to move up to the next step, whatever that might be. When I first started the industry over 16 years ago, the only option you really had was considered leadership. You'd go into a management level, CTO level with some sort of technical background. Luckily, times have changed. You know, the idea of a strong engineer in the tech space is no longer just considered at a glass ceiling level where you can only get to so far. You can actually go much further now with like big companies like Google and the big fan groups paying a lot of money for certain specialists in the industry. And even I myself, I've actually hired people that's earned more money than me as a CTO role into the organization because their skill set has actually been really needed. So the short answer is now, no, they don't have to always go down the leadership route as an individual, if they are an individual contributor trying to see where they're going to go with their careers, which is excellent to hear. And for me, it's about motivation. You know, which way do they decide? Are they motivated by leadership, by business management and other aspects, or do they purely want to stay in the technical side and not to need to have as much leadership responsibilities as they would normally have? So yeah, there's my quick overview of no, they don't have to always go into leaders.
Amazing. Thank you, Glyn. Josh, what about you? I'm seeing you smiling wryly there. Have you got some thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I totally agree with what Glyn started with. Really, we are stuck still, even though things are getting better and have gotten better. We're still stuck with this idea that for people to succeed, they have to have other people report to them. And I think as much as there are now examples in companies where you can earn a pretty high salary as an individual contributor, um, I think we have a long way to go to also make people feel like they are having the impact that they really are, and that those are positions to aspire to as much. It's not necessarily just about how much money they're making, but also about how everyone around them values the position and the progress that they've made in their career, and how that is being showcased and recognized. And I think as companies, we can be doing a much better job at putting the great individual contributors on a bigger pedestal and making sure that they are recognized for the amazing impact that they are having. And once you're able to do that, once genuinely both paths are being evaluated by every individual as equally recognized by society as well as equally recompensed, then you can have a conversation about what do you really want. But every conversation about what you really want outside of that context is always a bit harder to have because it's being clouded by what their family perceives as being success, what their friends and colleagues perceive as being success. And so I think that is something that we need to be better at. And actually, if there's one thing I have more often than not found that great individual contributors and can end up in a position where they no longer like their job after they have made the switch, because they're used to achieving all the things that they have. There's a reason why they were identified and people thought that they might be able to do the next step, and actually they end up coming to the conclusion where that people management might not be the things that, or might not encompass the things that really passion them as much. And so I actually find myself often taking devil's advocate position in this similar way to how I would do in a founder's position, actually try to dissuade someone from trying to take on management responsibilities. If they persist, even though you've tried to dissuade them for them, then there is a higher chance that they might actually like it. But if they fall down straight away, then there's probably a good signal.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about the rest of the panel? I'm curious, what are your thoughts? Because I mean, I don't know about you, but this is speaking to my people soul here. And the amount of times I've had people come to me and say, hey, like, we should absolutely put this person in a leader position. They're my best technical person, so they're an obvious fit. And that isn't normally always the case. But I'm curious about your experience as well, Katherine and Laura.
I think it's an interesting way to think about leadership, that you don't always have to be managing people to be a lead. So you can set your company up for success potentially by having tech leads who are responsible for technical leadership and engineering managers who do the people management. So you certainly can address some of those challenges with your organizational structure as well as your people encouraging.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I have to say, I totally agree with Josh. I think that companies still look at, becoming a director or a manager and leading people is a sign of success. And so I think every company has an obligation to think about the people that actually are wonderful individual contributors that we all need to have in our organization, and to create actual paths for them that don't make them feel less than because they don't have people reporting to them. I think that is critical, because people are only going to aspire to leadership because they want to advance their career. We have to give them paths to advance their career without that, understanding that not everybody aspires to manage people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so go, Josh. You go.
Yeah, sorry. I just wanted to kind of quickly rebound on what Katherine said there as well, because I think it is easily missed as a point, which is that even we are talking about leaders versus individual contributors. It's leaders of people versus individual contributors that can also be leaders, and leaders are being put on a pedestal. And the problem is that people leaders are being called leaders, and individual contributing leaders are then not being called leaders. That's actually comes to the core of the problem already.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's a really big differentiation for sure. So if we drill into a specific here then, what are the practical steps that someone could take to prepare talent for actually leading people? If that's the definition we take here, that it's people leaders we're talking about, what are those practical steps that we could take? Laura, what do you think? You're nodding. I see you there.
Yeah, well, as someone who runs a SaaS business for, technical learning, I totally believe that everybody can learn anything they set their mind to. They may not be inherently comfortable in the role, but everyone can learn the skills. We have about 2.7 million users on our platform, and over 34% of them have taken what normally is called soft skill courses or have read books or have attended our conferences around the concept of soft skills. So people are really understanding that to lead people, they need to have those soft skills. And I think it's companies' responsibility to provide that learning environment so that people can learn those skills. I don't think it's just mentoring. I think there are absolutes about the right way to lead and manage people. And that without actually providing that training, I've seen it happen so many times in my career, especially in technology, where, work with our HR department and they'll help you be a good manager. It takes more than that. And I think it's companies' responsibilities, if they care about people making that switch, how do you prepare people? You have to give them that learning environment where they can seek out those skills, even on their own, so they can build their capacity for learning before they're put in that role.
Absolutely. What are some other thoughts from the panel? I'm curious.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think when you're talking about bringing an individual along this journey to end up with them leading people, it really helps to understand their background and the route that they've taken to this point, because people come into technology either as their first career or perhaps they've made a career switch. So they may or may not have some of those other core competencies that you need as a leader. And things like public speaking is a very obvious one. Being comfortable with metrics and statistics, because quite often as a leader, you end up having to have quite scientific or conversations around the direction of where things are going. Having difficult conversations, that's not something actually as an IC you necessarily get comfortable doing. So I particularly would, you know why you're targeting that person to become a leader, but ask them what areas they feel uncomfortable about. We can refer them to resources. There's lots of really good books and, as Laura says, courses on the subject. But really make it part of their personal development plan to practice these skills. And I think practice is super key. I'm sure we all remember the first time we had to give someone feedback that perhaps they weren't meeting our expectations, and it is a horrible, horrible conversation. So if you actually have set up groups to do it, role play scenarios, I think, really are really useful, because it allows people to actually practice and get feedback on how they gave the feedback. Then that's something you can just make part of their regular plan to help them on that journey.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I mean, you're absolutely, all of you are speaking to my people soul 100%, because you're talking about the challenges that I face most days when we talk about how we actually scale this sort of thing. So I'm curious, what would you see as the most common obstacles then to making that specific step? So we've talked about the need to, build out these particular skills that you might need in this people leadership role, but what obstacles might you face and how could you potentially overcome them?
I'm super happy to keep speaking to this one.
Yeah, you keep going, Katherine. Go on.
Brilliant. So I see two that I've come across a lot in my career as a manager. The first one was common to all of us, I'm sure, which is a real sense of imposter syndrome. So the idea that you might have to manage your peers being kind of quite ridiculous, and how could you possibly manage people who are more experienced or older or know more than you do? And then the other one I've come across a lot is people not wanting to lose touch with technology or become too hands-off. And the way I would suggest helping someone to tackle that first one, that imposter syndrome one, is really to articulate to them what good leadership actually is, and what it's not is having all the answers. Actually, good leadership is almost mostly about listening and playing back and helping people come to agreements, helping set direction. But it isn't about being the person who has all the answers in the room. If you're the smartest person in the room, you haven't hired the right people. You should be working with people who are bringing stuff to you. So I talk to them about the individual contributor skills that they already have, and how they would use that as a manager. So, for example, if they're an IC, they will have given feedback on pull requests. Giving feedback on a suggestion is very similar, and helping them to see how the parallels in their current job would be useful in a leadership role. And then actually reminding everyone that we're all just people. Your manager is just a person. When you become a manager, you don't suddenly develop, I don't know, a superpower. It is just being a human being, and all knowing we want to do the best we can at our jobs. And then not wanting to become hands off and lose touch with technology. This is a really valid concern, but you can still lead, as we said, in a technical leadership role, and it's not an either or. You also, I think, can time box how much time you spend on the management, and if you want to stay running a small team and still stay hands-on, that's possible. And I talked to them. There's a Charity Majors writes a blog, and she's got an amazing article on the engineer manager pendulum, which is making the switch back and forth. That it's not like you commit to management and then that's it for the rest of your life or the rest of your career. You actually can become a really good manager because you've been close to engineering recently, and then going back into the engineering with those management skills can really help your team that you're working with at that time. So it's not a life sentence.
Yeah, that's super powerful actually, because I think a lot of people think, well, once you do it, that's it, you're stuck forever. And I've actually, in my own experience, seen people flip between the two quite a lot. And I think sometimes in different phases of your life, you might want a particular challenge over another. So that's a really good takeaway. I love that. Glyn, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, Catherine's absolutely right. I mean, imposter syndrome is a big one. If they've had a bad boss in the past, they may think, all right, am I going to be as bad as them? In most cases, they have no experience. They don't know what the job is going to be like. It's a completely different type of role to manage people. And if all you've ever done is code and worked in a team in that way, you don't know what your weaknesses are. You don't know what your strengths are. And if you'd even enjoy the job afterwards. So one way to try and overcome that obstacle, I think Katherine touched on this a little bit as well, was trying to tie in a little bit of people leadership into their roles, just so they get a taste for it. I mean, the biggest thing is if they don't know if they're going to want to go down that path, and it's a big decision, as you say, you can switch back, but there can be some challenges from that, feel like you failed in a leadership position. So it's better to slowly try and trickle in small amounts of leadership or responsibility to them, which gives them the feeling that they understand, what the role entails. Obviously, they can't do the complicated stuff like dealing with unhappy employees or salary negotiation, but other aspects like, making sure everyone's doing their PRs for the day, making sure, there's a backup system in place, or, something like that, where they can start to get a taste. And, from that, they might go, do you know what? I don't like this. I don't like running the stand-ups in the morning. I know this isn't for me. And then suddenly they've got a lot of empathy for their managers now. So therefore they should hopefully become better employees, because they understand that the management path is sometimes difficult as well. And, if they do enjoy it, then at least they've got an idea and a motivation to actually want to go further, read some more books, ask their mentors or their existing leads, what do I do next to actually go down this path and actually have this as part of my career plan?
Brilliant. I love that, Glyn. I've just noticed we have had a whole host of questions coming from the audience. So I'm going to pivot slightly, because even though we've got some up our sleeve, we're going to go to the audience. So Matt Chubb, you've asked 2 questions. Love this. So we'll go to the first one. So how do you effectively scale a non-management track from working on one team to multiple teams? What about multiple teams? I think our panel can read that question as well, if you would like to read it. Who wants to take a stab?
I mean, I can address it just by what we do at O'Reilly in our tech departments, right? So we've created a group that we call RAMP. And that team is really filled with a lot of individual contributors. They work as a team, but they help support all of the squads that are part, the agile teams and squads that we have throughout the business. So we make sure that that's a positive. Working on that team is a privilege. And I think that the rest of the teams, when they have access to that individual contributor who can really help them and help them effectively do their work, really makes a difference. And so part of that scaling a non-management track is making sure that there is room for those individual contributors to shine and to have input into all of the teams and what's happening throughout the business. So for O'Reilly, that has really worked for us, especially as we've scaled our SaaS business to well over $140 million. There's many, many teams now that need a lot of support. And we've seen that work incredibly well.
Oh, thank you, Laura. Does anyone else have any other examples?
Yeah, so we had this as well at Super Awesome, and this is where the leadership element really comes into its own from an individual contributor perspective. So the allowing the individual contributor enough ownership and enough freedom to be able to figure out where they think they can have the best impact, allowing them to be able to figure out where they should be present, which stand-ups do they attend and during what time and why, which groups do they connect with, and then for them to figure out, okay, for the next 3 months I'm going to be spending my time over here because I think it'll have the biggest possible impact based on what I can add to this particular team. And then the next 3 months, it might be somewhere else. But allowing them, at least what we have found to be effective, is that the autonomy with the remit to be able to choose their own area of impact meant that they were able to amplify their own efforts, for example. And so that's one thing that worked very well for us.
Amazing, thank you, Josh. And Matt actually has a very similar connected question, so I'm just going to go straight there. Even with a non-management career path, is there still a ceiling? So even if you're thinking about scaling this model, is there a ceiling there? Is it workable for an IC to be part of the C-suite?
Absolutely. Go ahead, Glyn.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I mean, yeah. So for an IC to be part of the C-suite, I don't think so. I mean, look, I think there is still a ceiling right in place right now for ICs. Yes, there are cases where inside the big corporations where you can get paid very well, have a very big, have an excellent title, be well respected inside the organization. But the C-suite isn't an IC role. You're not doing individual contribution in that. You are having to run an organization with multiple people underneath you. So without, just my personal opinion, the C-suite has responsibilities to other members. So therefore you can't have an IC in that role from that perspective. And yes, I think there is a current ceiling still, but as Joshua mentioned earlier, as an industry, we need to be better at promoting that path and promoting the value that it brings to the business. So it's not just, you're not just paying more money and they've still got the same title. There's actually a reputation and appreciation from the organization that they are appreciated and they are valuable to the business.
So out of curiosity,
I agree with you, Glyn.
Oh, go on, Laura, you go.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say, I tend to agree with you, Glyn, that at the C level, it's hard. Although as part of O'Reilly's venture capital side, I have seen individual contributors in smaller startups at the beginning, sort of as part of that leadership team. But I have seen, even like I said at O'Reilly, we have got individual contributors on our product leadership team, on our editorial leadership team. So one layer down from the C-suite, you need those individual contributors to make sure that you're seeing the full picture of your business. So
that is so connected to what I was going to ask you. So where is the ceiling? What does it really look like? What is the most, senior position you could hold as an IC? So Laura, you've just touched on, a product leadership team, but where's the limit? Does it matter about the size of your business, or where would that sit?
Can actually be a bit controversial, just to have at least one different voice on the panel. Maybe although I completely agree with the fact that currently the structures that are in place are such that there are very few examples of individual contributors in the C-suite. I would actually argue that is a mistake rather than a situation that we want to persist for exactly some of the reasons that we mentioned today, but also for the fact that you want to have a group of experts in some cases, or you want to have a technology expert, as the world is, specifically when we think about the CTO, where companies are being more and more driven by technology, having an individual contributor that has an understanding of all the technology implications of decisions that are happening at the C-suite, not at a people level, but at a pure technology level, is something that is becoming more and more relevant. Now, does it scale up to hundreds of thousands of people in an organization? I mean, I'm not standing here to be answering that question. I haven't been there before. Does it scale to hundreds? Yes. And so anywhere in between, first principles wise, I would suggest there's more room to grow, but I wouldn't be able to answer that yet.
Yeah, I could follow that up. I've seen that model in several companies, and I think it does work. I think you have to structure the organization around that person so that they have the support they need. So a VP engineering or somebody else whose responsibility is to look after the line management of the engineering function. You can't just have your CTO be an IC and let it go crazy. But it does allow. Yeah, I think we're quite lucky actually in technology, because I'm not sure that would work in many other disciplines, but certainly it's possible in our sector.
Brilliant. Thank you, Katherine. So I'm going to ping to another question. I'm trying to take us down a story here, but we'll see how we get to. So this one is from Sachin Shah. So for ICs who do not necessarily want to be managerial or leadership roles, how do you encourage and create KPIs for performance so that they actively mentor other ICs to perform at the highest level?
So I don't think it's actually just mentoring other ICs, right? As if they're a small group of people sitting in a corner, right? There are having individual contributors on your Agile teams and making sure that their KPIs are to help everyone on that team understand the sort of scope of technology that they are an expert in, and making sure that they help teach people what that means, I think is critical. I don't think it's just about ICs working with other ICs. I think you have to take the time to make sure they are part of your teams and that they're measured on how well they teach other people what they know, and how what they know is going to inform what that team is going to execute on. So just because you're an individual contributor doesn't mean you don't have to participate and work toward company goals as part of a team. And I think that to think about ICs as they're all just one group and not part of the company in some more formal way, I think is a mistake.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really around drawing it back to the impact that you expect that team to have, but being cautious not to set an objective which is just around delivery velocity. You need your objectives to kind of both have an aspect of what are we trying to deliver, what are we trying to achieve, but also how do we maintain team stability, how do we maintain team health metrics. And if you're measuring both of those things, then that helps incentivize people appropriately to share their knowledge.
I would also suggest if the real measurement is around impact, ultimately having impact through other people in a non-managerial capacity, but having impact through other people amplifies your own impact. And so at the end of the day, if someone doesn't respond to the KPI of wanting to have more impact in the company, well, then they are not scaling, whether it is an individual contributor leader or a people leader. But if they respond to the KPI of wanting to increase the impact that they're having on the business, then doing so through other people by being able to amplify what they're doing and mentoring them is something that that you can measure and something that they should be excited about.
And just one thing from my side, so you guys are completely right. I've seen this quite a lot where, especially developers only like 3 or 4 years in, they say, no, I don't want to do management. I don't want to do leadership. But that's not an acceptable answer. Yes, you may not want that career path, but there's still aspects of management and leadership still required for your role as an IC as you do become more senior inside the organization.
Powerful. I love that, Glyn. It's a conversation I'm having with my own team at the moment. I love it. Speaking of which, so Fred Castro has a question for us. It says, what are your thoughts about trying to match the compensation for both paths, managers and specialists? I certainly have a view on this, but I'm going to let you go first.
We've done some silence,
Lauren. We're in the people world now, aren't we? Okay, that's not a problem. So, my own view on this is absolutely we should do this. We should absolutely align the levels, but it depends on what progression framework you're using, because you need to be able to assess different capabilities on both sides. But if you really want to put your money where your mouth is, you're going to reward people the same regardless of whether they're an IC or a leader, as long as the capabilities are aligned. So for example, if you're comparing a CTO to a mid-engineer, it's not like for like. But if you're comparing a senior engineer to an engineering manager, you're probably closer. But Laura, I heard you talking. You go. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, but the reality is the market sets the value. And I'm a big believer in that. I think the market sets the value. And when companies try to put in incredibly strict compensation paths, and you're no longer competitive with the market, I actually think that can create problems as you're trying to grow your business. So understanding that the market creates that and creates those the sort of dollars for each role, you have to understand the relative importance of those roles to your company. So, I think it was Glyn that said you had hired people at more money than you were making because that role, let's use a senior software architect, for example, an individual contributor, senior software architect in many companies is making more than the CTO these days. Chief data officers are making more than chief technology officers in companies where that is a critical component of their business. So I feel like the market sets it. Your job is to make sure that you are creating value and a way for them to advance their sort of financial components of their jobs, no matter whether it's a manager path or a specialist path. But your job as a leader is to pay attention to the market and compensate fairly based on that if you want to stay competitive.
Definitely. And do you notice a difference depending on the size of the business that you're operating in? So I'm speaking from a business of, say, 60 people, where there isn't so much differentiation at the moment. We don't have the need to have, a very specific specialist role versus, the ones that you've just mentioned, whereas it's more things that you'd find more often on the market, I guess. Does it differ, or is it the same everywhere, would you say?
No, I totally agree with you. It's completely different. And, having been part of our venture capital firm, I've seen it, right? Small businesses that have 20 or 30 people have very different needs than a company of 500 or 700 or 10,000. So I think there you have to do what works for your business. I'm not a big believer in one size fits all, because I've seen so many different companies that actually put in and spend a lot of time on compensation models that fail after a year because the market moves in another direction. So I do think you have to pay attention to what your company needs at the moment and not to try to fit yourself into a model that might work for someone else.
Oh, I love that. Because we see that a lot, especially in the people space, of people buying up salary surveys, and they'll go, okay, this is going to fit for us. But actually, it doesn't always, and it's not really specific to where you can also compete in the market. So great advice. I love this. Okay, we've got 10 minutes left, so I'm going to move to another question. So this is from Jay Motta. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. Forgive me if not. As ICs go further, won't they need to lead not by authority, i.e. having a title, but by influencing people, teams, and organizations? Josh, I think you picked up on this earlier. Do you want to kick off on there?
Yeah, and it's absolutely correct. Like the almost by definition of, well, I'd say actually a bad interpretation of line management would be to tell other people what to do. That's actually one of the blockers that I almost touched on before. People sometimes think that is what management is about. It's like, now I can finally tell people how to go and do these things, which is not at all the case. Actually, whether you are a people leader or you are an IC leader, I would suggest that it is through discussion, convincing people that it's the right thing, helping them understand the wider context that you might have that they might not, being open to the fact that you might be wrong to that and that you're the one that should be changing your mind. But it is definitely through those means that you have the impact, not by telling people what to do, or at least that scales it stops scaling very, very quickly.
Can imagine. Anyone got any other thoughts? Otherwise, I'll go on, Glyn,
yeah,
go for it.
just from my side, the last thing you want is to be playing the hippo card. The highest paid person in the room. Essentially, if you're doing that, then it's not a good environment. People are not listening or having conversations which you need to be having to be making the right decisions. So, as I mentioned before, even if you're an IC, leadership capabilities and skills are still a requirement of the role. And as Joshua mentioned, influencing people and talking to teams and being able to have those conversations is a must for you to be able to do your job. Essentially be willing to be wrong, willing to come along and say, yeah, look, I think we should do it like this. People around you disagree. Okay, right. Explain it to me, understand why. Many a time I'm talking to people that are much stronger than me technically. And, I'll say, okay, look, you're stronger than me technically. I don't understand why you think this is a better route than what I've suggested. Explain it to me. And in those cases, and go, yes, okay, I completely understand now. Go ahead and, move forward.
Brilliant, I love that. I've got another question here from Ian Pender. How do you manage IC technical input into people on line management and resolve the tensions between the two?
So the example that I gave earlier about the ramp team, like creating a team where their job is to help influence other teams and to use what Glyn said, like really help people understand the technology and their unique skill set. Resolving the tension between the two actually comes from management, because as leaders and managers, it's our job to make sure that people see that we respect the individual contributor role and that their contributions are just as important as anybody leading a team. And that comes from the tone that management sets around it. To go back to what we were talking about at the beginning, why would people aspire to stay in the IC path? And they would aspire because management shows and appreciates that throughout the organization.
Yeah, I would say making sure you've got a really clear route for that sort of feedback. So the way when I read this question, I was thinking potentially we're talking about maybe if an engineering lead is struggling potentially with an engineer on their team and they want that person to know they need to improve and they need to give that feedback either directly to that engineer, but more likely to the engineer's manager to help that engineer make those improvements. So making sure you've got really clear lines of feedback and accountability that feedback is acted on, I think is really important for just making sure that the tension doesn't build up to a point where it needs to be resolved. It just sort of keeps going.
I mean, essentially, the most common use case of this exact issue would be there's technical debt in the platform. We're struggling. We want to clean it up. And then obviously the line management saying, no, we need to release features. And this is where those conversations will take place. And obviously where the conflict's going to arise of how to prioritize and what's best business value.
And what's the best way to tackle that head on, Glyn?
Oh, that's a tough one, Lauren. Obviously, it's on a case-by-case basis, but you've got to understand both sides. You've got to understand what the impact of the technical debt is to the organisation, how it's slowing you down. Is it becoming a problem with hiring and new starters because they're not able to get onboarded? What's the cost to the business by that remaining there versus the cost of the business of not doing this product feature or not releasing the current roadmap? And then obviously trying to explain the business side of it to the organization, saying, okay, well, we need to prioritize on this, but we will come back to, the backlog of, cleanup items that I know you're very keen to do, but it's not the business priority at this point. But again, there's always tough conversations around that, and it's on a case-by-case basis.
Absolutely. Okay, so those are all the questions we've had from the audience so far. So I'm going to pivot back to some things that we've thought about already. I'm curious, team, what are the traits that you look for at every level as signs of leadership potential?
I mean, I'll take that one at the beginning. I mean, I think there are two things that are critical when you're looking for signs of leadership potential. The first is curiosity. Innate curiosity is what is going to drive people to succeed, to learn more, to try different things. Having that innate curiosity, I think, is one of the most important traits of a leader. You're always learning. You're always willing to take the step to find out more. So I think that's the first one. The second one is empathy, being able to internalize a problem and really understand it, and know that your job is not always to solve, but to listen first, I think is also the sign of a really good leader. And I think that gets missed. I think sometimes people think of a good leader as someone who can solve a problem. And it's actually someone who can bring other people together and to help people solve their own problems is the sign of a true leader, someone who empowers their teams. And then it's always about the ability to care. I think that you have to show great care as a leader. And sometimes somebody said, oh, the highest paid person in the room is supposed to be the most important. And I think the most important person in the room is the person who cares about the outcomes that are happening in that room for the individuals there. So for me, those are the three things that I think really matter, no matter what role you're in. Individual contributor, where you're simply leading by helping people understand what they need to know, or as a manager and leader, managing people.
I see you nodding away there, John.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. Really, the in terms of traits, like, do they help as much as they do, or do they think about what the consequence of their actions are on other people and on the system, the team as a whole, versus just thinking about their particular area? Can they see those ripple effects, and do they care about them? They touch on the same things as Laura was saying, and I think she's been pretty exhaustive there from in terms of the core things to look at. But yeah, those would be the things I'd be looking at too, indeed.
Does anyone want to add on top of that, or should I move on?
I'm just going to +1 for empathy with everything Laura said. I think it's so key, because if you can empathize with individuals, then you're going to be capable of helping develop them. But if you can empathize with your business, then you can help explain to people why they're doing the work they're doing and why we need to tackle this particular problem. It is the most important thing.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Okay, we've got 2 special minutes left together, so I'm going to quick fire this last question at you all. So, she says, has the shift of IC to leader changed in a remote world? Quick fire. We've got 2 minutes to maximise.
Yes.
Yes.
Tell me more.
I think one of the things that is very interesting that I found is that there is a lot more family life gets and work life. Basically, things have been mixed much more than they used to, and so being able to understand what is going on with the full person in their entire life, what their work setting is. You have to worry about not just how is work happening when they're at work. You have to worry about everything around it, and that is not just the setting, it's also the mindset, because it's the mindset of, wait, what happens to a person when they're alone or just talking to people remotely? Some people respond to that in different ways to others. Some people love that type of setting, and other people are depressed because of the fact that they don't get to see people, and that has changed a lot in the way that you talk to people remotely.
Absolutely.
I would say it's changed from an isolation point of view. So it's quite difficult now, I think, to maybe see what people are doing as much, and you're not as visible as a leader, and individuals aren't as visible. So signals you might have seen previously to give you an idea someone's on a particular track, you have to really make the opportunities to see them and create the spaces for them in a way that just happened a bit more organically before.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Oh my goodness. Glyn was right. It went so quickly. I can't believe we're at the end of the session. So thank you so much to our wonderful panel for talking with us today. You can connect with all of our speakers and I after the event if you'd like to ask more questions, whatever you like. I'm going to be posting all of our details in the Slack channel for you, but I hope you enjoyed our session. See you later, everyone.